Okay, good morning. Good morning. If we could have everyone please take their seats, we'll get started. So, good morning to everyone. On behalf of our President and CEO, Max Steyer, myself, and all of us at the partnership, I'd like to welcome you to the launch of the Public Service Leadership Institute. We also have individuals joining us online. My name is James Christian Blockwood, Executive Vice President of the Partnership for Public Service. And for those unfamiliar with us, the partnership is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to building a better government and a stronger democracy. I'm grateful that you've joined us this morning as we mark the establishment of the Public Service Leadership Institute, an effort that will move our mission and our country forward. Each and every one of you in this room and those online have faced real challenges over the past 2 years. Perhaps you or someone close to you had to navigate COVID-19. Or maybe you had to persevere in the face of economic uncertainty. Pandemics, natural disasters, economic downturns, war, and other challenges are unpredictable as they are consequential, as global in their reach as they are personal in their impact. Our federal government is one of the most powerful tools we have to lead us through these challenges. But to do so, it needs effective public service leadership, the most critical factor to our government's success and impact. Our nation needs elected, appointed, and career government leaders of integrity who can unify us in bringing solutions and hope to a battered and beleaguered world. The federal government needs what the best organizations across sectors possess: a consistent standard for leadership and a way to meet it. And that is why we've created the Public Service Leadership Institute, a place to go where government leaders can rally behind a single leadership standard, develop essential leadership skills together, and recommit to their constitutional oath. Our nonpartisan, nonprofit status and long track record of developing tens of thousands of leaders at all levels uniquely positions us to raise that standard of public service leadership across agencies, across government, and across administrations. The Public Service Leadership Institute serves as the preeminent source of public service leadership perspectives, programs, and policies. It aims to increase the performance and accountability of public service leaders. Those who take part in our work will strengthen their stewardship of public trust and be better prepared to fulfill their oath of office. This will reinforce their commitment to public good, ultimately delivering greater results to the country and improving public trust in government. As someone who has taken this oath several times, I have witnessed the unmatched importance of public service firsthand. And I recently went with some of our leaders, with hundreds of federal leaders for that matter, from across government on a visit to the Jefferson Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial, and the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. We talked about the contradictions and the paradoxes that exist in America, and of their role to support and defend the values on which this country was founded. Through this experience, it struck me that if public service leaders are meeting their full potential, they can be a stone of hope, as described by Dr. King. I look forward to partnering with each and every one of you as we strive to make this vision a reality through the Public Service Leadership Institute. Thank you, and for those of you in government, thank you for your service. And if you would now please allow me to introduce Interior Secretary Holland, who will share her perspective on why this effort today matters so much. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Deb Holland, Secretary of the Interior, single mom, tribal member, and marathon runner. I mention all these things because the public servants who devote their lives to our country also wear many hats that give them unique perspectives and insights that make them valuable members of the federal family and leaders in public service. Today, I'm proud to welcome everyone to the launch of the Public Service Leadership Institute. I offer a huge congratulations to the Partnership for Public Service for making this program possible and investing the time and energy to professional leadership development. Through this institute, we can help foster the kinds of leaders we need in government, those who are guided by a deep commitment to the public good and stewardship of the public's trust. Throughout my life, I've seen firsthand the difference that good leaders make. My father was a 30-year combat Marine and won a Silver Star Medal for saving 6 lives in Vietnam. My mother, a public servant herself, was a Navy veteran who worked with Native American students for more than 2 decades at the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Guided by their example and by an incredible group of mentors, I have consistently worked to fulfill our government's promise of serving all people, including those who are too often left behind. From phone bank volunteer and organizer to congresswoman to cabinet member, I recognize the role that I and others play in making room for diverse voices and meeting our biggest challenges with equitable and inclusive solutions. And as a member of the Pueblo of Laguna and a 35th generation New Mexican, I believe that we need leadership in government where we haven't had it before. We need leaders who look like America. That's why I am proud to be the first Native American to serve as a cabinet secretary, and more importantly, why I understand my responsibility to lead the ladder down for future leaders. The Institute will also serve as a ladder that public servants can climb and will drive us closer to an equitable and inclusive vision for our country and our government. It will train and provide leaders at all levels with actionable insights for success, offer a world-class suite of training programs and custom offerings, and set the standard for effective federal leadership through the public service leadership model. To protect our land, our earth, and its people, we need bold public service leadership and to empower communities who are often overlooked or left behind. I challenge everyone to use this opportunity to build leaders that reflect the diversity of America, because I truly believe that the best solutions are developed when diverse experiences and perspectives have a voice at the leadership table. This is an incredible responsibility and an opportunity to build a future we are all proud to embrace. I'm honored to join you all today, and congratulations again to the partnership on this important initiative. I can't wait to see the groundbreaking work you all will do. Thank you.
Thank you to Secretary Holland and for her service. Thank you all again for your service, as James Christian mentioned, and so grateful to have you here in person and online. Welcome. My name is Andrew Marshall, and I have the privilege of leading the team, the strategy, and the work of the Public Service Leadership Institute. We are grateful again for all of you who have joined us today. You could have been in a lot of places right now, like seeing the Top Gun movie for the 4th time. I'm looking at you, Charlie Bolden. But instead, you are actually here to recognize public service in the real world. We envision a dynamic and an innovative federal government led by public service leaders of integrity that effectively serves our diverse nation. Pause for a moment and imagine what this country and world would be like if this vision were realized. I see unity triumph over division. I see equity overcome prejudice. I see competent and coordinated responses to crises. I see trust flow freely between the government and the people it serves. This is the world we have been working toward for more than 2 decades at the Partnership for Public Service. What was once a small part of our organization that developed dozens of leaders each year is now central to our mission. Each year, we develop thousands of public service leaders, from new supervisors to seasoned executives. Where we once took a general approach to leadership development, we now have the public service leadership model the standard for effective government leadership, as well as an associated 360 assessment tool and other resources supporting leaders directly in their performance and guiding our overall program strategy. We have assembled the Government Leadership Advisory Council, without whom we would not have this public service leadership model. They are luminaries from across sectors who collectively understand government and leadership better than any other group I could imagine. And I used the verb assembled deliberately, as I see them as the Avengers for good government, or maybe the guardians of the government. Our experience has enabled us to publish research and commentary on public service leadership, sharing insights and perspectives with a vast audience. Lastly, we have recommendations for the administration and Congress on how we could bring more consistency and accountability to government leadership. That's where we've been. This has all been a crescendo to the launch of the Public Service Leadership Institute. The Institute is born out of the idea that good leadership is the most important driver for effective government. As the world becomes less certain and more complex, there is an urgent need for public service leaders we can trust. Our research shows that just 4 in 10 Americans at least somewhat trust the government to do what is right. Facing this declining trust, as well as the upcoming January 6th hearings that remind us of the urgent need to protect our democratic processes, we must devote all of our collective energy to the cause of unified, trustworthy, and effective public service leadership. The Institute focuses on 3 key areas: amplifying the importance of public service leadership, developing government leaders, and unifying around a common standard for leadership. Allow me to briefly mention each. We will amplify the importance of public service leadership to a vast audience that goes well beyond the Beltway through the insights we publish and the convenings we hold. Later this summer, you can look forward to reading our series of briefs on women in public service leadership, drawing from focus groups and tens of thousands of data points from our 360 assessment tool. Individual leaders will enter the Institute's programs and develop into the next version of themselves, equipped to engage others across agencies and sectors, lead change in their organizations, and achieve results for the public. A far cry from transactional training, the journey through the Institute's programs will be nothing short of transformative, something our many alumni often speak to, and we're grateful for all the alumni who are here today. In the coming year, we will offer a certification in public service leadership, giving the same prestige and credibility to government leaders as to those in other professions. Agencies partner with us to unify around a common standard for leading, as we've seen recently when directors from across the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention used our Public Service Leadership 360 to strengthen their individual and collective leadership. One of the most important areas to build unity is between political appointees and career leaders, something the Institute and our Center for Presidential Transition will prioritize in the coming years as a means to strengthen the continuity of government and improve the transition of presidential power. I have coached and facilitated with thousands of federal leaders over the course of my 12 years at the partnership. As I do so, I see glimpses of this better world I described. It's the executive at the Department of Agriculture who is leading complex, cross-sector efforts to keep your meat and poultry safe. It's the team of AmeriCorps appointees and members of their senior executive service who are dedicated to sustaining the spirit of service as a core part of our national identity. It's the cross-agency federal team in California that partners with state and local agencies to prepare for and respond to natural disasters. It's the executive at the Census Bureau who is using AI and training others in this emerging technology to build efficiency and accuracy for the greater good. Government is not this invisible force or this impenetrable fortress. It's made up of people who are here to make your life and my life better. It's people who took an oath to promote our general welfare, to promote a better life for you, for me, and for all. If elected, appointed, and career public service leaders all held themselves and one another to the same standard, the public would develop greater trust in its leaders, further motivating these leaders to honor their stewardship and unleashing the full potential of government to deliver on its promise across generations. That's why I'm excited about the launch of this institute, to fulfill that promise and move us toward a better government and a stronger democracy. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's main event, this esteemed panel. It's made up of current and former federal leaders who will underscore the importance of public service leadership. And it covers a range of fields, from medicine to science and technology to security to housing to space. And we're grateful for all of them who are here. This panel includes Adrian Todman, Deputy Secretary. I'm going to get the slide up now. Deputy Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. John Tien, Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Charlie Bolden, former Administrator of NASA. Dr. Francis Collins, former Director of the National Institutes of Health, and without whom we probably wouldn't be here in person today. We also celebrated him in a case study this week that you should all look at on our Institute website. And Steve Preston, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and former Administrator of the Small Business Administration. The panel will be moderated by Nancy Marshall-Genzer, a correspondent for Marketplace, and we are grateful for all of them. They can go ahead and take their places up on the stage. Following the panel, we will conclude by hearing from two people instrumental in bringing this institute and vision to life: Doug Conant, former CEO of Campbell Soup and founder of Conant Leadership, and Bob McDonald, former Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, former CEO of Procter & Gamble, and the Chairman of the West Point Association of Graduates, who will address us virtually. Please join me in welcoming this esteemed panel.
I'm loud, but I'm not that loud. Thank you all for being here. This is so exciting. Don't worry, I have a clock right there. So I'm going to keep an eye on the time because we have a lot to talk about today. I'm going to start with just a very general question, and we're going to go down the line in order. So Adrian, what motivated you to go into public service in the first place?
First of all, I'd like to thank the partnership for this invitation and for Max's leadership. I'll say, as a onboarding deputy secretary, I looked to the partnership and the information it had just to help guide my first couple days. So congratulations to the partnership and this new institute. So I was in the 11th grade when I made my first trip here to Washington, D.C., and it clearly made an impact. And it was one of those civic organizations that takes you around to all the branches of government. And I will say, at that point, I thought I was going to major in psychology, and immediately understood that that wasn't my path. Once I got a sense of the important impact that public service has on your human experience. And so I was smitten and went off to college and doubled right back, worked on the Hill, had my first tour at HUD, worked in local government, and ran a National Housing Association, and really happy to be here on the perch. I am now working with Secretary Fudge. So I think at that point in high school, I realized that was my path, and I've never looked back.
I'm very glad. Thank you. Next, so why did you go into public service?
Thanks very much, Nancy. I'll pick up the baton from my fellow deputy secretary here, Andrea. It was also in high school. It was actually in 10th grade, and a slightly...
It's like this all the time.
A slightly different variant. It actually was paired somewhat with a physical threat from my father, where we were lifting weights. He was a college football player in his past days. I was a high school football player. He had, I won't say how many pounds, but he was spotting me in a bench press, and he said, "Where are you thinking about going to college?" And he was a professor at Columbia, and I thought the right answer was Columbia, and my real answer was, I just want to go wherever my girlfriend, who's now my wife, was going. And he said, remember, he's spotting me. It's several, tens of pounds there, and he said, "I think you should go to West Point. I think you should go to the United States Military Academy." And I was from California at the time. I thought all I could think of was short hair, no girls, no fun. And look, at the end of the day, to cut to the chase, I did go to West Point, and I really did go out of an obligation to the family. And the obligation was because my father was born in mainland China, was nationalist Chinese, and he really escaped communist China, where his family was being persecuted. And he said to me, in the 1980s, he said, "Look, this is an obligation to give back to the United States of America. You wouldn't be here, our family wouldn't be here if they hadn't given us that opportunity to come through Ellis Island." And ultimately, I have to admit, I went to West Point out of a family obligation, but after 4 years of really internalizing and understanding what West Point was all about, what the United States Army was about, what public service was all about, and really living by the ethos that's on my class ring, along with Bernie Banks, who's my classmate over there, duty, honor, country. I realized after 4 years what a privilege it was and not an obligation to serve.
Wow. You have a couple of really hard acts to follow.
He's Top Gun right here.
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, if you see, I have a small Fitbit, not a big watch, so I'm not a fighter pilot. I was born into public service. I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina. in the 50s and 60s. My mom and dad were career teachers. Both of them I ended up working for, sort of. I was my mother's library assistant in middle school, and my dad was my high school football coach. And so I knew that if I followed in their footsteps, I would be in the field of public service. I decided, however, that that was not what I wanted to do. They worked too hard, and they didn't get paid enough. So at the age of 12, I saw a program on television about men of Annapolis. It was about life at the Naval Academy. And I fell in love with the Naval Academy sight unseen, decided I didn't have a clue what would happen after that. I just knew I wanted to wear the uniform. And it didn't hurt that all the women from all over the New England, area came to the academy on the weekends. I was
Is there
just
a theme here?
I was.
There is.
I didn't know anything about all this duty, honor, country stuff, which we didn't do anyway. We're all about honor, courage, commitment. Everybody has their little things. But I was actually born into it and went away and then decided to come back when I learned about my father's and my uncle's service in World War II, when they actually had to fight for the right to get into the military to defend our nation. And I felt that, okay, Naval Academy sounds a little bit like what they did, so I'm going to go and see if I can't pick up where they left off and see what I can do.
Wow. Okay, Dr. Collins, can you...
Who both said, don't ever do this. So let me explain. They met in graduate school, and it was just the beginning of the Depression, and wanted to do something to help people who were at the depths of the Depression in West Virginia. And so they became part of an experimental community trying to help miners get back on their feet in a place called Arthurdale, and worked pretty directly for Eleanor Roosevelt, who was the main sponsor of this experimental community. And it was going pretty well, and they were pretty inspired, and then it became political. And there was a concern, somebody breathed to FDR, this sounds like a socialist community. And all of a sudden, it sort of went away. And hence, with myself and my three brothers, my parents said, you can do whatever you want, chase whatever dream you have, but don't ever work for the federal government. Well, here I am, so obviously... In one instance, I disobeyed my parents, probably about one of the few. But how did I end up then in that pathway? I'm a scientist. I got excited about science and eventually about medicine and wanted to do something with science to try to improve the human condition. And so went through all those many years of training and ended up as a faculty member at the University of Michigan. And then there was this phone call that said, we got this thing called the Genome Project. And it needs somebody to come and lead it. And most people think it's going to fail anyway, but it would be really good if you kind of gave it a good try. So how about giving up everything you're doing there and come to Bethesda, Maryland, become, oh yes, a federal employee, and lead this enterprise? And I remembered my mom and dad's words, and I said, nope, that's not me. But then I thought about it, and this is the critical part of it. Thought about it and said, what are you going to say to yourself 10 years from now, 20 years from now? You were just given an opportunity to be a public servant, to lead a project which, if it actually succeeds, and I kind of thought it might, this is going to change everything. And I'm going to say no to that because it's not convenient right now. That didn't seem like the right answer. So I thought about it a little longer, and then I said yes. And for the last 29 years, I've been a public servant as the Genome Project Director, then as the Director of the National Institutes of Health under 3 presidents, and now as the Acting Science Advisor to President Biden. And I don't want to make this sound like it was a big sacrifice. It has been fantastic as a scientist to be able to lead this kind of amazing time in history where all these things are happening that I didn't think were possible in my lifetime, and yet here they are. And to be able to bring other scientists together with that kind of dream and that kind of opportunity for innovation and discovery, that is the best possible way I could imagine spending my life. So public service, yeah, I believe in it, and I really believe in what the Partnership for Public Service is doing, but it also has been an enormously satisfying way to spend my scientific career.
Wow. All right, can you top?
Oh, wow, batting cleanup. First of all, I want to thank the partnership for using a 15-year-old photograph of me. So if you can listen to my voice but look at that photograph, I'd feel better about this whole experience. So my pathway was very different. I started out in business. I was a poli-sci major. I was always interested in policy and NGOs and kind of their role in the world and what the government did. But I really found a passion in business. I went into finance, and then I went into corporate leadership. And a little over 20 years into my career, I just had this strong sense that I'd built a certain set of skills through the pathway I'd had, and really wanted to think about making a different kind of impact in life. And I got a call from somebody I knew who worked in the administration at the time, a former colleague, who said, you know, we're really looking for people who can run large operations, take on operational problems. So much of what we do in the government is not policy, it is running things, and there are a lot of problems that need to be fixed. So I said, you know, given the fact that I had been thinking about this issue in life, and given the fact that, you know, historically I was very connected to things, you know, that were related to the role of government and the impact it had, I said, well, if it matters, I'll do it. I don't want to I don't want to go just to kind of check a box. I also, by the way, had 5 small children, and things were going great where we were. So, and I had a wife to talk this, to discuss this with, who was a terrific encourager. So I had been asked to look at an undersecretary role it was a terrific role. I'd gone through all the background checks. I was about 2 weeks away from the nomination, and I got a call from the White House saying, "Are you sitting down?" Well, after you've been through 6 months of background checks, it's like, that wasn't the best opener for me. But I said, yeah, they said, you know, it's okay, but we have a job that is very important to the president, and we consider it a higher calling. And it was running the SBA. And I said, well, I'm not really sure why that's such a big deal, right? Well, what I learned after that was that the SBA is the arm of the federal government that makes loans to homeowners and to businesses who've lost their homes and businesses in a disaster. And 10 months after Katrina, almost nobody had gotten their loans yet. And it was just a devastating situation. Then I started reading the press about the SBA, and it was very, very difficult. Sort of the joy of going into this nice undersecretary role and taking it had sort of dissipated with the thought of going into the lion's den here. And the White House, people at the White House said, don't do this if you're not ready. It's going to be rocky. And then I sort of thought, you know, like, why do we serve? Like, what do I want my life to be about? And if the skills that I've developed over 20-some years, leading organizations, dealing with complex operational issues, being a finance person, if I can employ them in that place to have an impact on those people, like, that's the best thing. Like, you don't want to go to something that's sort of a cushy, nice to have, I check the box. Like, you want to be able to go in and have what you do really matter. So I told my wife, I feel like, you know, a moth driven to the flame, but we're gonna jump in, and we moved the family, and it was the best thing I'd ever done. Best decision I ever made. And it was just, there was so much, and to this day, I have just deep gratitude that I had the opportunity, and that I had the ability to work with a terrific team in that process to do something that mattered.
Wow, those are amazing answers. Yeah, really great. And I just threw that, we met before the panel started, I just said, hey, I'm gonna ask you all why you got into public service, is that okay? So that was just off the top of their heads. We're gonna get into the meatier questions now, which may not be quite as entertaining. We'll see. So HUD, across government, only 36% of senior executives are women, though HUD is doing a lot better at 54%, so yay HUD. What is HUD doing to achieve this, and how could the rest of government learn from your example?
Great, thank you. You know, as in all things, you have to be intentional when you want to achieve a particular outcome. And I saw this during my first tour at HUD in the 90s, and now that I've returned, that inside of HUD, well, number one, HUD's mission sells itself. You know, we probably, no disrespect to Homeland Security, but we probably do more for communities and homeowners and renters, and some of you probably don't even know we do healthcare, facilities, insurance. Like, we take care of whole communities in ways that's probably not transparent to them, but we are everywhere. And so our mission really is grounded in taking care of people and families. And so we know that in doing that, and we also know that for our base programs, our affordable housing programs, public housing, over 70% of the head of households in those programs are female. So there was an intentional approach to what should the leadership of HUD look like, and in terms of thinking through all of the policies that we carry out. So in addition to working very closely with affinity groups who also whose members are female, we also do a lot of looking at our internal talent. And we deploy our ability to reassign executives inside of the department when we see those needs, and just grooming sort of from the inside. So intentionality, you know, using our mission to really attract the talent that we want to have, and then keeping that talent and nurturing that talent and making sure that people feel they have a place to grow and learn.
I want to go work at HUD. All right, Department of Homeland Security. John, your public service cuts across, of course, military and civil service, and across Republican and Democratic administrations, as we know. So what are the common threads of public service leadership that you've seen or that you've practiced that could help instill greater unity of purpose in government?
Thanks very much. I appreciate that. And again, picking up on my Deputy Secretary counterparts handoff here, you know, she talked about the mission of HUD, and I'll answer the question in a minute. But the mission for the Department of Homeland Security is, with honor, integrity, we will safeguard the American people, our homeland, and our values. Different than HUD, but to me, this is what the values, and I think Andrew referenced it somewhat in his opening comments when he talked about making things better, making things safer, making things in a higher quality of life for HUD. And this is what I think is the beauty of the federal government, of the interagency, which is that the way our founding fathers designed this government, and obviously all of these, you know, HUD and us were not part of the founding fathers, but the overall concept that the federal government is here to serve the people. The federal government is here to serve the people. And really, I think in the Biden-Harris administration, Adrian and I are in something called the President's Management Council, organized by OMB Management, really, and we're focused on that in so many different ways. You know, my recommendation is go look at all the different presidential management agenda items that we're doing, but one of them is around customer service, a very focused item that says, and it's really, one is practical, but the other part of it really is spiritual and philosophical, that says, that reminds us, we shouldn't need to be reminded, but reminds us, you're here to serve the American people. On the question that you asked, Nancy, I think it's, you know, Democrat, Republican, and you're right, I've served in both administrations, and really I consider myself to be nonpartisan, not even have to be bipartisan, because service at the end of the day should be nonpartisan. And in the service that I saw in both administrations, types of administrations, is the why and the how are effectively the same. The why, which is that the folks who join federal government are there to serve a greater good, a greater purpose, and really to serve, they really desire to serve their fellow American citizens. So that's the why. On the how, it is a dedication to expertise, it's a dedication to improve oneself, and a dedication to service. And those are the hows. The one thing where I think that we could still do better, individually and collectively, is making sure that we are always reminding ourselves of the need to have strong doses between that why and how, of self-awareness and a lot of tolerance, and not to become dogmatic. And you know, I think that's on both sides of the aisle in that regard. So those are the comparisons I see.
NASA. So we talked about HUD and how many women at HUD are in senior executive positions, but NASA's got some bragging rights too, I will say. So look for that. So what kind of leadership standard did you set that is still in the NASA culture today?
Nancy, one of the things that's important is to remember, I'm an old guy, so I was the NASA administrator several administrations ago through several different parties. And the important point is, throughout all that, NASA has remained the best place to work in the federal government. That says there is something institutional, something that is built into the fabric of the agency for it to do that. And I think it's employee engagement, number one. When I came, I don't know where we were, but we were not number one in the federal government. One thing I did was reached out and found somebody who worked in the place that was number one in the federal government and happened to be the human capital officer, Jerry Buchholz, and enticed her to come to NASA and become our, human capital officer. And immediately you could see that she came and talked to me every single day, said, get out in the hallway. Every time you see somebody, let them know, that you appreciate what they're doing, that their job is important. Employee engagement, employee engagement, employee engagement. It is absolutely essential, and it's one of the, if you remember the model, it's one of the things that we talk about in the leadership model. So I think it's NASA's focus on employee engagement. It's adherence to our vision, which very simply put is to take the things that we learn and do and make sure that we use them to benefit all humankind. So when somebody talks to Dr. Collins, as we've had astronauts do working his projects on the International Space Station, what is most important for them is to understand that they now are a part of a team that's trying to make life better for people all over the world, because they're trying to do gene sequencing or something else in the Genome Project that's going to help people. We always emphasize, if you forget that your job is not about you, it's about making life better for people back on Earth. And that's whether we're talking about science, aeronautics, human space flight, it doesn't make any difference. We're there to try to make life better for people back here on the planet. And I think that's what keeps people there. It doesn't hurt that we do stuff, and we have great toys. So that also is a great benefit that NASA has that most of the other federal agencies don't have, and the fact that we encourage people to not to try to fail, but to take risks and to understand that if we're not taking risk and we're not failing, we're not really trying hard. And so contrary to what people have this belief that NASA's mantra is failure is not an option, that is the farthest thing from the truth. Failure is, in fact, an option, and it's something that we don't enjoy seeing, but we know that if we're going to continue to advance, we've got to take bigger risks than everybody else, and we've got to be willing to accept those and turn them around and make them into good things.
Okay, now I want to work at NASA.
Hey!
But you didn't even say she.
We'll see where I want to work at the end of this. Dr. Collins, so the first year of the pandemic, what leadership practices did you use? Because your workforce must have been very, very tired, but dedicated, and motivated them to discover the vaccine.
So yes, we do want you to come to NIH, so let me see if I can make this pitch work. The people that work at NIH, 40,000 of them, are all motivated by wanting to bring the tools of science to solve problems in human medicine, to alleviate suffering, to provide chances for long and healthy lives. So when COVID-19 strikes in January of 2020, we had the perfect workforce to say, yeah, we're going to take this on. And my role as the director was to try to unleash that in every possible way. I mean, we had scientists who'd been working on heart disease, and they said, we're going to put that aside. We've got an idea about how to work on SARS-CoV-2. Is that okay? Oh, yeah, it's okay, and let me help you make the right connections so that you have a collaboration that's going to make that work. We had the scientists in the Vaccine Research Center who had actually been working on mRNA vaccines for quite some time. It's not like this just suddenly arose in somebody's head on January 10th of 2020. This is 25 years of preparation, and we did everything to unleash their capabilities to turn that new technology into a vaccine in absolutely record time. And we tried to help everybody at NIH and outside of NIH to share in that adventure, because it was an adventure, a high-stakes adventure to be sure. I did everything I could to try to keep the employees linked up, feeling like a team, even though we were all separate from each other because of COVID. We couldn't sort of get together, but we ran weekly interviews with leaders at NIH, where I would ask them about what they were doing, and they would explain it in terms that everybody in the institution could understand. We ran town hall meetings fairly regularly to answer questions about what was happening in this space. We built partnerships with industry so that there was no opportunity for wasted time. And the momentum built. And yes, everybody was exhausted. There were a lot of people around me, including myself, probably working 80, 100 hours a week, but you just had to. And you didn't really feel like that was a burden because you felt every day that goes by, this is a chance to accelerate this progress. And if you wasted time, you're actually putting lives at risk. So it was like the height of the reason that we all wanted to be in this particular public service role because we were called to it. Steve said that. You probably feel okay about your public service job when you're having an easy day, but you feel particularly blessed and called to your role when you're having a really challenging day, but you know you are in the position to make things turn out in a fashion that's going to help people. So I don't think I've ever seen the morale at NIH better than during the midst of this terrible pandemic crisis because people want to have a purpose in life, and that's what we were able to give them.
Can't get much more purpose than that.
Are you
It's
coming to
saving lives.
NIH? Come on.
I'm going to have to clone myself 5 times. Steve, okay, we're going to talk about accountability. So how do you instill a sense of accountability and consistency among the political appointees that you lead in government?
Yeah. So all this talk about NASA being number one has made me nervous because when I went to SBA, we were 31. And it was out of 31 agencies. And so I realized, when I came into the agency, I wanted to do a video to the employees so they could at least see who the new person was. And the advice was, no, keep it upbeat, like really happy, like you're the positive guy. And I said, like, we've got the worst morale in the government. Like, I can't do that. That's not how I'm going to lead. I'm going to look at people through the video and say, I've read the survey. I know how you feel, and I want to be your partner in making this better. And I think a big part of that was bringing accountability, because people want to be part of something great. And I think when you listen to the missions of all of these, that all these people on my right have served, there is an opportunity to do great things in the federal government. I certainly saw it at SBA, and oh my gosh, I saw it at HUD during the housing crisis, right? So we did a number of things. Number one, we got very clear on what our agenda was. What are our goals? Extreme clarity. We worked through those with the team, but in a number of ways. But we had a very specific agenda with goals in it. We started out with pillars before we even talked about those. How do we think about accountability, and how do we think about what we do? So we said everything we do has to be outcomes focused. We're not going to talk about moving papers sideways. Like, what is the outcome we're going to drive? And we're going to focus on 3 areas. Number one, we're going to focus on the customer, because that is who we serve, the citizen. We're also going to focus on enabling our employees, so our employees have the training, the tools, and technology to do their jobs, which in many cases is a real burden. Well, at least was in my agencies, a real burden because people wanted to do great work but didn't have the capability to reach their potential. And the third piece was around stewardship. I think we called it accountable, efficient, and transparent, because we were also a regulator. We had significant financial risk in the agency. We oversaw contracting programs, and we needed to bring rigor and quality to those areas. Then once we determined what our sort of list of initiatives were, every one of those had metrics, milestones, deliverables. They were managed by a program office, and we met consistently to say, where are you on this? Did you hit your milestones? How are we doing? What are the issues? How do we course correct? And we published a dashboard for every person in the agency and for Congress to see on all of our initiatives. We rated them all red, yellow, or green. There were reds on there. I did town halls with the employees. And so we all talked about it. We all had visibility and transparency. We celebrated our wins because in ways that were very tangible. Because we could say 3 months ago there were 160,000 people who didn't have a loan in the Gulf, and we've cut that number in half, or we've done whatever. And so, one of my, greatest pieces. So I knew about the partnership very early because they're the ones that do the best places to work survey. So they're the ones that told me I was 31. So I think one of my greatest pieces of gratitude was 2 years later where they said, you guys got the most improved award. And so it was, and the great thing about that is the same people who felt like they were losing before now became people who felt like they were winning. And they could see where they were winning, why they were winning, and they felt a part of that. And I think as leaders, it's so important for us to engage our workforce, especially here, because there is just, the work is so impactful and so vital and so strong. And like I said, a lot of people are here because they want to be part of something great. And when you give them the ability to really kind of participate that as fully as possible, man, it just matters to them so much.
PPP loans during the pandemic. I mean, it's very impactful.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, we have time for one more round of questions. Don't be too verbose, everybody. I know you want to impress me, but okay, your second question is about your career of working across state, local, and federal lines. So what are the leadership qualities that are necessary for cross-government partnerships to work and ultimately to benefit the communities that you serve?
You know, I found that leadership is sometimes a humility in action. To really be determined as a leader, you have to realize you have to exercise compromise. You have to realize that you can't lead if folks don't follow. That is probably the greatest task of challenging your humility, if you try to lead and no one's behind to do what you want them to do. But in terms of working across governments and making sure that we're working on behalf of communities, sometimes you have to distill what the common goal is. Like, what are we all trying to achieve? And I found that if you get down to a common goal, what you're really debating is how you get to that goal. And that's where compromise and a little bit of humility comes into play. And so I've been at the federal level, I've looked at the local level, and it's the same across government levels. And one of the things that I found to be true is that if you are able to speak plainly and in a way that folks understand what you're actually trying to achieve and not hide behind programs and rules, that I found to be something that really pushes the envelope and allows leaders to really get there, because not only will your followers follow, but the other leaders in the room will realize and understand what you're really trying to achieve and not sort of hide behind other types of government gimmicks. And sometimes that tends to happen.
So not being rigid.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, John, your second question is, what can career-appointed and elected public service leaders learn from the military, especially as it relates to investment in leadership development and working under a shared standard of excellence?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is that Andrew, Max, and the partnership is already taking, I don't know if the lessons learned are necessarily from the military, but it's really taking a lessons learned from what has been successful across, many different industries, many different disciplines, which is at the end of the day, leaders, they're not born, they're developed, they are inspired, and they are often inspired by exemplars. The other thing I'll say on the military part is we have General Bolden sitting to my left, we have General Banks, who's on your board, you have Bob McDonald, who's the former VA secretary. So, they could probably answer this question and maybe in a different way or just as easily. But the two things that I constantly saw in the military, and that I see now that I'm actually back here in the federal government, Department of Homeland Security, but where we are trying, Secretary Mayorkas and I are trying to instill, imbue, ingrain within the workforce here at the Department of Homeland Security are, one, a foundational aspect towards training and leadership. And then the second part is the fact that you are always a student, right? That you can never be complacent in your own leadership development and your own public service development. When General Banks and I went to the United States Military Academy, one of the very first things they taught us within like the first probably 8 weeks is what does it mean to be a part of the profession of arms. What does it mean to be a part of the profession of arms? And one of the philosophers that we studied, political scientists, was a guy named Dr. Samuel Huntington, who said that, you know, a profession is really defined by those who are experts who have a societal responsibility. Those who are experts of a societal responsibility. And ultimately, that's what we in the profession of public servants in the federal government in particular are experts who have a societal responsibility. I think on the societal responsibility part, we get that. On the experts part, and that is both in terms of your competence, your professional competence, but also in your leadership development. That's something Secretary Mayorkas and I are trying to do. He really is the longest serving political appointee in Department of Homeland Security. He said, here's one of the things we want to do, and we've started it to some extent with some help from the partnership, a public service ethos training on the very first day for all new trainees, 8 hours, that talks about what does it mean to be a public servant. And again, we're inspired by a lot of things you guys do here. Love the fact that when I walked in, the first thing I'm handed is this great card. And this reminds me of some of the things that we used to hand out in the Army, the warrior ethos, the soldier's creed, the Army values, all building towards a professional military ethic. So we appreciate the inspiration, things like this, and the help from the partnership to do those things where maybe not necessarily bring the military into it, but bring in the quality of the kinds of things the partnership does. Thanks.
Andrew, I didn't get one of those cards. All right, I hope so. Okay, General Bolden.
I'm looking at the clock and it's running off.
I know, we have 10 minutes. Can we go a tiny bit long, everybody? Couple minutes? Yes. All right, because we only have 10 minutes left. I am looking at the clock. So we're good, okay. So General Bolden, your second question. NASA has gained a lot of public recognition lately for new innovations. We've got the launching of the Webb telescope, of course, also the landing of the Perseverance rover on Mars, which is incredible. So how did you and other leaders encourage employees to take risks? You mentioned a little bit about this before, and push innovations like those.
The biggest thing is to demonstrate that you mean what you say. You can tell people to do things all along, but you've got to give them an example. My favorite project in my almost 8 years as the NASA administrator was something called Morpheus. Morpheus was a dismal failure its first time. It was a prototype lunar lander. We were testing this system that had methane fuel. And we did all kinds of tethered tests on Morpheus. And it was a team of young engineers and scientists with very little experience before, and we just unleashed them down at the Johnson Space Center from all over the agency, and they came and said, okay, we're ready to go test fly this thing, and we're going to have to untether it and let it free fly on its own. And I said, hey, great, I'm really looking forward to this. And so they went down to the Kennedy Space Center, put it on the end of the runway. We thought it was going to be an internal NASA test, nobody else around. Aviation Week, Life Mag, you name it, they were there. And they went through the countdown, and 3, 2, 1, liftoff, and Morpheus went and crashed and burned. And I was sitting in my office in Washington, D.C., and I got on the phone right away to John O'Lanson, who was the project manager, and I said, hey, John, do me a favor. Go out and talk to your team. Tell them, they can cry, they can do whatever they want to do, but get over it. This is what we figured, might happen. And so let's go out and find out what went wrong, and let's fix it and try to make sure that it doesn't happen again. We went through Challenger, Columbia, Apollo 1. We celebrate them this time of year, every year, the end of January, and it's because we recognize the fact that failure will occur, but you're only as good as your ability to get back up and go on. And some people say that NASA's finest hour was Apollo 13, which was a failure in that the crew never got to the moon, never got to set foot on the moon the way they were supposed to. But the lessons from Apollo 1, Apollo 13, and then the other losses that we had enabled the agency to be the great place that it is today. So you really have to walk the walk, and you can't just talk the talk. You've got to demonstrate that when they fail, you're behind them, and you're going to back them up, and you're not going to start pointing fingers and the like.
Learn from your mistakes. Yeah, that's very good advice. Dr. Collins, your second question is about scientific leadership. So how does scientific leadership from the U.S. benefit the world? And in what ways do we need the world to help move our country forward?
Oh, Nancy, thank you. I'm really glad for that question. And by the way, thank you for being our moderator, all of you who are used to hearing Nancy's voice on Marketplace. It's great to have her here in person. I think science has always been, when it's really successful, an international effort. I mean, look at space, for instance, Charlie, and the way in which we have learned from each other across the planet. I think it was Pasteur who said, "Science belongs to no one country. It is the torch that illuminates the world." From my experience over these 30 years almost now in public service of science and medicine, some of the most exciting things we have done have been accomplished because of international partnerships. The Human Genome Project was an international effort, involved 6 countries, 2,400 scientists all working together, agreeing to the same goals as far as release of the data every 24 hours, making sure the data was highly accurate, making sure we got the whole genome done, and it wasn't like, well, you know, chromosome 7 didn't quite turn out. You can't say that. And everybody agreed to that and didn't really worry about who was going to get the credit, and there was a lot of shifting around about who had capabilities and who needed to catch up. That was a great model. We've done so many more things like that in medicine, whether it's in cancer research or whether it's understanding things about stem cells or the microbiome. And scientists love this. And sometimes it almost seems like if we could just keep the politics out of the way, the scientists would build these international networks and would get great stuff done, and more power to them. That's probably a better way to do things. Certainly right now, when we see the consequences of a global pandemic, anybody who tries to say that you can just study science from your country's perspective and that'll be sufficient, you can just see how flawed that is. And so now, as we are trying to make sure that we're prepared for whatever that next variant is that might be threatening us, or whatever the next completely new pandemic might be downstream, we are inextricably linked together in international collaborative ways. Some of the data that I look at every day about COVID, because it's sort of a glimpse of where we're going, is South Africa. And because they have remarkably advanced now genomic capabilities that we've helped them build, they are giving us insights that we wouldn't have otherwise. So I couldn't say enough about how critical it is. If you're going to be a scientist, if you're going to care about health, you got to care about the whole planet. We are not going to be able to live as isolated groups or countries, not now and not ever. And the same applies, of course, to the science of climate change, which we didn't quite get to, but which also has lots of other health consequences. And I think we will all admit you're not going to deal with climate change unless the whole world deals with climate change.
And COVID doesn't know if you're American or South African or European.
It generally
really
does not
doesn't
check your passport.
That's true. Okay. Secretary Preston, we're going to go from talking about the world to talking about individuals. Excuse me. So both when you led HUD and SBA, you worked to serve millions in huge communities. What did you do to keep in mind that your service was ultimately about helping individuals?
Yeah. That was such an important issue for us because, as you mentioned, ultimately much of what we did touched individuals, but in many cases we didn't have a competitor, right? So in the private sector, competitors keep you sharp. Competitors are always listening to the customer, and if you're not doing as well with the customer as your competitor, you're going to lose market share. And actually, there was one example of that in the government, which was FHA at HUD. FHA during the subprime market, when it was in its heyday, had gone to almost like 2-3% of the market. When that evaporated, it was the only game in town and became 25 or 30% of the market. So it's really important to think about, if I don't have that sort of natural edge from a competitor, how do I bring the voice of the customer and how do I elevate that discussion with people? At SBA, this was a huge issue for us, specifically in the disaster loan program initially, because the agency was sort of getting crushed by the volume of the disaster loans. The operations had kind of broken down. People weren't able to get these loans out. And the discussion became a lot more about policy and paperwork and where the problems are. And people weren't talking about people in the Gulf. And so we pulled the whole team together early on when we were early in the stage of redesigning the operations. And there's a camera guy at HUD, sort of a media guy, and I said, just go to the Gulf. Just go to our guys in New Orleans and Mississippi and just videotape people telling their stories. Like, we need that voice into the room before we start talking about process design and technology and cycle times and all these business. And there was a lot of tension in the group because of the challenges. I said, look, we all flew in. I said, before we talk about anything, I want us to listen to the people we serve. And in the back of my mind, there was a little bit like, is this going to fly? You know? And so the lights went out. We showed the people just telling their stories, and it was just incredible. A woman who ran a daycare center who said, you know, when I get up and running, people go back to work because I take care of their kids. A taxi driver whose entire business was taking old people to the doctor. And then individuals. The light went on. The room was speechless, and the entire dialogue for that 3-day working session changed. People, and what I said to the group is, look, and this, Charlie, I really appreciated your discussion about failure. I said, everybody gets a free pass here. It has been so tough. We all get that things haven't worked out. But the battle is on the outside, right? It's not on the inside. And then we continued to do that. I had a town hall in New Orleans with people who were looking to get their loans after we changed the process to hear their voices. And we flew in all of our leaders from the disaster center, and they got to meet people and help them with their loans directly. And then later on, we redesigned the process so that instead of Americans calling an 800 number and sending their loan paperwork to a P.O. box that was somewhere far, far away, we gave every person who was looking to rebuild their home or their business the name of a human being with a real name and a real direct phone number. And so everybody had a customer service agent. That became our biggest pipeline to understanding the problems. We would work with those people on the phones, and then those people had a team around them. We redesigned our structure so that there were client teams rather than a big production line. And I won't talk about that because everybody will be asleep and we are out of time. But we changed the whole ethos of the organization to say the tip of the spear is that customer service person. When the information comes from somebody who needs to rebuild their home, the whole team knows do you have another home you're needing to buy? When is the closing date? Do you have deadlines? What paperwork are you missing? How are you going to get it? Can we reach out to people and help you? Okay, team. And then we started monitoring, production and success, and we started piping up sort of the narratives that those customer service agents were hearing. One of the things that we heard was, people can't get their deeds because the parish office in New Orleans is so overworked and they can't find stuff. So we put people on a plane and flew them to New Orleans and said, that's a logjam. Let's help them out there. Let's be creative. And it completely changed the narrative. And it also completely changed the morale because people felt like they knew the customer, they knew what their lives were like, they heard the stories, I got my home, and the whole place changed. It was remarkable.
Eyes and ears on the ground. It's nothing like being there. And we're so glad you were all here today to join us. We only went a minute 20 over. We could talk all day, but everybody has places to go. So thank you for being here. We so appreciate it.
It's great to see so many friends here. I'm Doug Conant. I've been a member of our board of directors for a long time. I think over a decade, Max, wherever you are. But I'm also the chairman of our Government Leadership Advisory Council. And on behalf of our board, we have 20 individuals. We have Tony here, we have Steve down there, and our Government Leadership Advisory Council, we have Bernie with us, and Charlie Bolden is also on that council. I want to thank you for your time today, and I want to thank you in advance for your commitment to helping us move this forward. Our board of 20 strong is passionate about this work, just like our associates are. In fact, Tony was saying at our last board meeting, how can we help you? How can we help the organization lift itself up? We are passionate about this. 20 people who have served this board and this country at the highest levels for decades. Also, our Government Leadership Advisory Council, we have 11 hardy individuals on that council. A few of them here today, and you'll hear from Bob McDonald, who will do the big close in 2 minutes on video. But those 11 people have been in and around, deeply engaged in the practice and the study of leadership for over 400 years. Those 11 people. General Banks, one of them. Charlie Bolden, he alone has been doing this for about 100 years. Close. But, and by the way, these 11 people are still deeply engaged in the practice of leadership in the here and now. This is not just about history. This is about today and tomorrow. And we have the wind at our backs at the partnership, and I want to thank Andrew, James Christian, and Max for leading the way. We're going to do amazing things here. I don't think anyone would disagree with the fact that our government leaders feel that they do not have the wind at their back. We want to help in a nonpartisan, nonprofit way. We are here to help. That's all we want to do. None of us are paid for this. No one on the board, no one on the Leadership Advisory Council. We are all in it to be helpful, and we will help, and we will move forward. Every time we have an opportunity in this program to touch a government leader, we are making a difference. And some of you have been through that here. You know what we're talking about. We can do so much more, and with your help, we will. On that note, I want to thank you for coming today, and we're going to turn it over to Mr. I guess he's Mr. McDonald now. All right, thank you.
In my leadership roles in business and in government, I've often said that leadership is the most scarce resource in the world. When there was a business problem to be solved or a problem in government to be solved, leadership is what made the difference. So it's the most important resource that we need, but it's also the scarcest. When I got to the Department of Veterans Affairs, I discovered that we had dozens of leadership models, one for every different consulting group that we had hired. As a result of that, we had no leadership model. We had no common culture, no common understanding of what leadership was. And because of that, we had no currency or culture or vocabulary of leadership. My first move as secretary was to get groups of people together and to develop a leadership model. And in doing that, make that model pervasive in our organization, from recruiting all the way to promoting, training, and rewarding employees. The good news is the Public Service Leadership Institute offers this model here and now. It was created by a group of experts, I would argue world-class experts on the subject of leadership, and it's available for you to use within your organization. I encourage all of you to rally around this common standard, embracing your stewardship of public trust and strengthening your commitment to the public good. To me, this is the single biggest difference we can make in government. If we could simply train the employees of government to learn how to lead effectively or more effectively, it would make a big difference in the lives of all Americans. So I look forward to joining you in this quest. Thank you.
Doug Conant, thank you. Bob McDonald, thank you. I know he's with us online. Thanks to all of you who joined online, all of you here. Thanks to the incredible panel for being here, taking the time, sharing your stories, your expertise, your wisdom, and especially for your service. Thanks, Nancy, for joining us as well. We are excited about what's ahead, and I will conclude by just saying, better leaders, better government, stronger democracy, let's go.